Okay, so for viewers and listeners, Comrade Monty and I actually just got done recording the Iran segment that we did that you will be listening to in approximately 30 minutes. Usually at this time, I am live, but actually, we wanted to do a pre-recorded segment on the nursing strike in New York City. This is a really important strike. New York City has been on the forefront of a lot of people's minds as Mayor Zoran Mamdani just got elected, but it should also be on the forefront of people's minds for this strike as well, because this is organized labor at it again, holding the capitalist class accountable in the best way that they can, which is on strike. And so I have Comrade Monty here today, and he's going to be reading an article that is being written by a comrade of ours in the party and will be published soon on the strike, and then we're going to have some conversation on it and show some photos. So Comrade Monty, whenever you're ready, you can go ahead and start reading that article and get us started.
Great, thank you so much. Nurses unite in historic strike, fighting for fairness in New York City's overburdened hospitals. In a powerful show of solidarity, nearly 15,000 nurses walked off the job this week, launching the largest nursing strike in the city's history. Starting early Monday morning, workers from major hospitals like Mount Sinai, Montefiore Medical Center, and New York Presbyterian stood together on picket lines, demanding better pay, safer working conditions, and enough staff to handle the daily crush of patients. This action highlights the deep divide between those who keep our health system running and the executives who profit from it, reminding us that real change comes when everyday people band together against unfair systems. The strike kicked off after contract talks broke down over the weekend, with nurses represented by the New York State Nurses Association refusing to accept what they see as shortchanging on basic needs. Their old agreements expired at the end of last year, leaving them without protections they say are essential for both their safety and patient care. Nurses like Tristan Castillo from the emergency department at New York Presbyterian put it plainly, quote, "They don't want to give us a fair contract, and they don't want to give us safe staffing, and now they're trying to roll back on our benefits," unquote. Others on the lines echoed this, chanting for a fair contract now, while braving the cold to make their voices heard. At the heart of the dispute is staffing, or the lack of it. Nurses report being stretched thin, handling workloads that put everyone at risk during a tough flu season that's already seen over 32,000 cases in the city. They want more hires to ease the burden, along with safeguards against workplace violence, like recent incidents where staff face threats from patients. There's also pushback on hospitals using artificial intelligence in ways that could replace human judgment, and demand for fully funded benefits to help workers make ends meet. Union leaders say these aren't wild asks. They're about creating a system where care comes first, not cost cutting. Hospital bosses, meanwhile, have dug in their heels, calling demands extreme and reckless. They've hired over 1,000 temporary nurses to keep doors open, rerouting ambulances and canceling some procedures to manage the gaps. Mount Sinai even fired 3 nurses, accusing them of hiding supplies during drills, a move the union calls bullying to scare others from joining the strike. One of those fired, Liliana Prestia, fired back at a rally. Quote, "We will not be bullied. It was Mount Sinai's cruel attempt to stop us from joining the strike line and to make us an example to our fellow nurses," unquote. Executives point to big numbers, like claims of 40% pay hike that could push average salaries to $220,000 or more in 3 years at some sites. But nurses counter that their proposals are more modest, around 25% over the same period, and necessary after years of underinvestment. This clash underscores a bigger truth. While hospital CEOs rake in millions, one at Montefiore made over $16 million last year, another at New York Presbyterian topped $26 million. Frontline workers struggle with burnout and bills. As Mayor Zoran Mamdani said while visiting the pickets, quote, "There's no shortage of wealth in the healthcare industry. These executives are not having a difficulty making ends meet," unquote. He urged both sides back to the table, but stood firm with the nurses, saying they deserve quote, "dignity, respect, and the fair pay and treatment they deserve," unquote. Governor Kathy Hochul has stepped in too, declaring a state of emergency over the fears the strike could endanger lives and sending health officials to monitor care. She's called for a deal that honors the nurses' vital role, but so far talks haven't resumed since Sunday. By Tuesday, the second day of the walkout, hospitals reported no major disruptions, though the union filed charges against Mount Sinai for unfair labor practices. Nurses like Roy Permal, an ICU worker, vowed to hold, quote, vow to hold out, quote, we're prepared to stay out for as long as needed to secure a better contract, unquote. This isn't this isn't the first time nurses have had to fight like this. Just 3 years ago, in 2023, a similar 3-day strike won pay raises and staffing improvements, though both sides now argue over whether those gains have held up. Today's action builds on that, showing how collective strength can challenge a setup where profits often trump people's well being. As Dania Munoz, a nurse practitioner at Mount Sinai, explained, quote, we deserve fair pay, but this is about safety for our patients, for ourselves, and for our profession, unquote. In a city built on the backs of its workers, this strike is a call for a fairer share, one that puts health and humanity ahead of the bottom line. As negotiations drag on, the outcome could set the tone for labor fights everywhere, proving that when people unite, they can push back against inequality and build something better for all. All right, that is the article. And so I went there on Monday the 19th, and I can tell you a little bit about my experience if you'd like.
Yeah, let's go ahead and hear about it. That was a really great article, soon to be released by Comrade John at the Red Phoenix. Go to the American Party of Labor Red Phoenix.com. I don't know if that's the exact URL, but either way, American Party of Labor, look at it, find it, go to our newspaper. I think that yeah, this strike is so vital and important in understanding the conditions that our nurses are working in, because as we know, nursing is now has what was it? It was taken off the list of professional degrees. Is that what it was, or something along those lines by the Trump
Yeah,
administration? Hmm?
yeah, that is true.
Yes,
Uh,
and so the nursing profession and nurses have been under attack for quite a while now.
right, and that actually like ties into something that was really important during the conversations I had with people. So I got to Mount Sinai West around noon on Monday, and there, if you can see these pictures, there were some like a good amount of people out there marching back and forth, waving a lot of different signs. There was sort of like a mutual aid station with or like with food and coffee, pizza and pastries and all these things that people had brought out to support. I assume some of it was the union, and some of it was probably family members of nurses and stuff like that. And there's a huge turnout of the children, the families, the nieces, nephews of our nurses coming out to support uh, the strike, which is like
Yeah,
very hard to see. Lots of just community, right? Like it's not just a strike. Uh, these nurses, they're part of our communities here in New York City, and they have families that they're raising. They have people that care about them, and they see how this job like wears away at you.
yeah, no, and it's amazing to see that, folks were showing up for the nurses uh of New York City that were going on strike. And it's because, nurses, I actually, so a little anecdote about myself. When I was 18, I worked as a receptionist at an old folks home. And this was around 2022, 2023 is when I was working there. And I knew nurses, of course, who worked at this old folks home as well, who said, I started in the industry, working as a nurse, 20, 30 years ago. And then, my kid grew up and wanted to be a nurse. And I tried to talk them out of it because of, how exhausting and exploitative it is to work at a hospital. You're always understaffed, because that's a mechanism used by the capitalist class to ensure that workers are kept on like the thinnest of margins possible. And hearing about these experiences, we have to understand how this ties in with the larger labor movement. And it's that nurses are the backbone of the healthcare industry. Um, as the thing about it is, nurses know so much. They have to be so thoroughly educated to be able to do their job. And there is such a huge assault happening against nurses. And this is happening, broadly across the working class. The knowledge that people have no longer necessarily guarantees them a solid livable wage. And this is the deterioration of that has been happening for years and years now, against the working class, perpetrated by the capitalist class, as they are skimming more and more off the top until we have pennies. And as this pertains to the nurses and what they have been going through, this affects their work so much. When you have one nurse to a floor of patients, all of them with different situations, and they're kept on the thinnest um, of staff and constantly overworked. Nurses work upwards of 12-hour shifts, sometimes longer. And I've worked in home healthcare for over a year now, and just working in that, which is strictly a non-medical field, I'm exhausted. So I could only imagine what they are going through. And so this is one of the many reasons why solidarity with the nurses strike is so important. Monty, did you want to add to that at all?
Yeah, so I went out and I talked to a handful of nurses, just whoever didn't seem too busy to speak to me, um, and some of the strike captains. And a big thing that you were already touching on, it's the backbone of this issue, is the companies are trying to roll back on the nurses staffing language. The nurses want four a shift. Was it the first shift, second shift, and then third shift is two, right? I don't think that's unreasonable, right? Company wants to roll these back, right? The company, even, this is a big thing with what I was talking to people about, is that they worry that they're already short staffed, and with the Trump bill that took nursing away from being a professional degree and the benefits that come for, like, students who want to go study that, um, it de-incentivizes people to go into nursing. And then when you have terrible working conditions on the floor, and you have bad staffing policies on the floor when you get in, people aren't going to want to commit to studying that, and going into this field, and so that further exacerbates the staffing shortages. The whole thing about the wages, like, they care about the wages, but the wages are a, like, around the board way of leveraging their demands for keeping their staffing policy. And the company even wants to roll back their pensions, and they're rolling back their health care. You know that a nurse at Mount Sinai West health insurance does not cover them to see a doctor at Mount Sinai West.
What?
The
What?
hospital they work at there
What?
is not in their coverage plan.
That's okay. We cannot swear on air, but that's fricked up, man. I'm
Yeah.
sorry, that was so bad. That was so bad.
I talked to a
But
nurse named Shannon. She's the woman that's holding the pancit, like, no more lumpia pancit. So she's a Filipino American nurse. She's been working for 8 years in the nursing industry, and she is the 13th nurse in her family, right? And she's telling me about, like, the rollback in healthcare, how that they aren't even covered at the hospital that they work at. So they have to get off work at a hospital and then go to a different hospital if they need to go to a doctor, right? And as far as, like, just the bad conditions at work, there's no chairs in the lactation rooms in the maternity department of Mount Sinai West.
oh my God,
So we would have to stand to breastfeed.
which is insane. The conditions are bad. The conditions, needless to say, and not that we haven't already said a ton about it, but the conditions are piss poor, to be frank. I mean, I mean, here's the thing. You know that things are really getting bad when even nurses can't go to the hospital that they work at to get medical care, you know, and this is, I think, is this a recession indicator? No, I think that this whole situation, what it shows me the most, I think that the biggest thing about what this situation is showing is that, you know, we are in a stage of capitalism where um you know, the just complete blatant, you know, theft of workers you know, value and wages has been so thoroughly shown in this situation. And what I'm saying about what I mean by that is you can see these are not you know, when we look at what unions were bargaining for you know, 50 years ago versus what unions are bargaining for now, you know, we have how far have we fallen? You know, we are at a point now where it's not even about bargaining for a better wage. We're trying to bargain just for a livable wage. You know, we don't even have like, and this is why it's so important to support organized labor like this and support the nurses who are, you know, out there on the picket lines, you know, and going out there with them and showing solidarity and support, because this type of behavior is not going to stop until you know, we actually make an organized militant stand um, against corporations and companies that are trying to rob us blind. You know, organized labor is at an all-time low at the moment, and things are starting to get better. I will say, you know, things are slowly getting better, but we need to speed that process up because people don't have the time anymore to wait around. Not that we did ever. You know, these are lives on the line here. You know, when a nurse can't even go to to the hospital that they work at to get medical coverage and care for a situation that they might be dealing with, a situation that they might be dealing with as a result of their workplace, dangerous conditions and those kinds of things. We have to understand that this this should be unacceptable to everyone, and the fact that it isn't means that we really need to be doing a lot more accountability holding, and showing that, listen, you can see the humanity in other people and realize that these conditions could be across the board, and they are. You know, they're getting to that point. And, you know, if you're a working person listening to this and thinking, well, things aren't like that at my job, well, buddy, you know, that is, it's not going to remain like that forever. Let me tell you.
Okay, yeah. So there's a handful of other things I just wanted to hit on. Mount Sinai had also um, locked out the like two nurses from two offices before the strike started, because 3 years ago some of the striking nurses had like hid in the offices overnight to like cause some disruptions. So some nice direct action there, but the Mount Sinai wanted to prevent that from happening, and they uh, in doing so enraged the nurses more, and I think is part of what led to the strike being called. um, and then I wanted to talk about like the scabs, and the way that scabbing sort of presents itself in the nursing industry, and the framing that the media will take towards the scabs, or the way the scabs will try to frame themselves, right?
Right.
So the scabs will try to frame the union as like really greedy. They're like going to be promoting private migrant nursing to like fill in the gaps. From this article on Politico, there's a woman named Una Hopkins, and she posted in her LinkedIn, right, that the that the union is reckless or whatever, right? She's just like a scab nurse, right? And she says, quote, transitioning from unionized staff to skilled travel nurses who prioritize patient care and safety was eye-opening. Seeing coordinated, compassionate, and collaborative care delivered so seamlessly reinforced an important truth. Professional nursing stands on its own without union interference, right? So
Bruh.
she, right. So what she's saying, trying to moralize this, that if you're a nurse, like she says, I don't wish poorly on those who chose to abandon patients. I wish for you a reflective moment. Why did you become a nurse? Stand up to the bullies that led you in this direction, right? So this
What?
kind of
What
right,
the
yeah.
fuck?
Framing the union as bullies, and asking the striking nurses, why did you become a nurse, and moralizing on this, trying to say that it's your duty, it's a moral duty to continue care when you're being abused by a private a corporation that's profiting off of sickness, right? That like
That's
you're supposed to be selfless in this moment, right? And
that's
the
ridiculous.
yeah, it's crazy. And what really is, if she cares so much about these patients, right? Then what's going to help them, what's going to save more lives than anything else, is sensible staffing policy, right? Having enough nurses on the floor is going to prevent accidents. If you have a nurse that's on no sleep, you're going to and like taking care of double like a necessary their necessary workload, uh there's going to be mistakes happening, and people's lives are on the line in these situations, right? Having a safe and healthy working staff that has healthcare is a prerequisite for having a functioning healthcare system.
Right. And I think that it's incredibly important to highlight that because this is not like the thing is that the true solution to these problems is not to punch down on the onto the or punch left, I should say, punch left to the unions and say, you guys are the problem. Why did you become a nurse? And it's like, girl, what point are you trying to make with that? Like what's the point exactly? Like I think that scabs who try to oftentimes scabs are people who, as you said, are migrant labor who they are able to pay less, and who they're able to exploit even more. And ultimately, I think that what we need to be understanding about everything that's been going on in this situation is, you know, a lot of the anti-union talk, and I see this all the time actually, especially on Facebook, which I think it might just be like a CIA a psyop or something. But basically, like you see, or like bots or something, where it's like people commenting under Teamsters posts and everything, basically being like they're ruining things or like screw these unions and all this other stuff. And I'm like, how can you be so anti-labor when the ultimate fix to the problems that this hospital is dealing with is simply by having more staff and paying these people more. The simple fix to this is to just give people like livable working conditions and like pay them a livable wage and don't overwork them and give them solid days off. Those are not those are not radical ideas. Nothing about this is nothing about what they are demanding is radical. It is simple, like workers' demands for just a workplace that is like they're able to sustain themselves. None of this should be framed as like obviously a strike is very radical and we should be supporting that. But the demands here, and while I should say I absolutely support these demands, but we should understand that in the context, these demands are people literally demanding like basic livable working conditions, basic like a solid basic wage that actually allows them to live a life and not work every single day of their life to simply survive. Like what we shouldn't be punching left at the organization that is trying to make it easier for all of us to live.
Right. There's some other things too. Around the time of the last contract negotiation, there was a assembly member named Latoya Joyner who chaired the chamber's labor committee, and she was allied with the New York State Nurses Association, the union, at the time of the last contract, right? Um, but in 2024, she abruptly resigned uh, and joined Montefiore as a senior labor advisor. Becoming the third Bronx Democratic politician in recent history to join the borough's biggest employer. So she was a public representative, and she flipped. She was on the side of the nurses, right? She was, oh, I'm for the people. I'm a Democrat. I'm for the people. And then she took the paycheck and started working as a labor advisor, which is a psychological warfare role, basically. a strike breaking role for Montefiore Hospital.
I
Um,
think. Oh, sorry. Go
yeah,
ahead. Oh
go
well.
ahead.
All I was gonna say is I think that this also kind of invokes something that Lenin, I believe, had said, where um, like the limits of trade unionism. And I'm sure, I think Marx also talked about this, but I could be mistaken. There's limits to trade unionism and the class consciousness that can be achieved there because, of examples exactly like this, where you kind of create a class situation within the union itself. Unions of them in themselves who are not guided by, radical communist leftist ideology and theory places we kind of talk about this, we touch on this concept a little bit in the Iran segment. When you don't have a firm theoretical basis and foundation of which to base your organization off of, and in our cases, and in the case of unions, a strong firm leftist foundation and understanding your conditions, you are ultimately going to fall into these problems. What were you going to say, Monty?
It's a party, right? It's
Yeah.
not like the ideology, right? Like yeah, we have our worldview as the working class party as Marxist Leninists, right? But like it's not that like oh the leadership of the union needs to like believe in Marxism or like accept Marxism or something like it's Jesus Christ, right? It's a party. We need a revolutionary party, and we need our workers' movements to be like intertwined with it,
Yeah,
right?
exactly. And it's the fact is that this the situation that we are in right now with organized labor is that it has been largely co-opted by elements of the capitalist class to ensure that organized labor doesn't get it doesn't get far enough to the place that it needs to be organized in such a way that it can actually do real damage to the capitalist class and their interests. That doesn't mean that that the labor movement can't or that it hasn't in the past. But the bourgeois class has been extremely effective here in the United States, and we can see how the tide is changing. Things are changing, but that also comes with the fact that like we actively, communists, the vanguard, need to actively be continuing to agitate and get more people within organized labor to build that class consciousness. Because when we do that, we can then actually become a formidable force and a force to be reckoned with, and truly challenge the capitalist class and what they are the war they are waging on the working people. And their infiltration into unions is something that absolutely needs to be stopped in its tracks in order for us to reach that point.
One other thing that I think illustrates the position of the company and the position of the union and stuff like that is that the union slightly lowered its initial quest for an annual 10% raises at all the hospitals. And Mount Sinai, Mount Fiore, and New York Presbyterian are offering annual like $4,500 increases in nurses and salary benefits, arguing that that's all that they can afford because of Trump's one big beautiful bill act. So we have the company itself being like, oh, like we can't like trying to frame this as you nurses have to do what's right for the patients, right? We're the good guy, and we're just caught in a hard place because evil Trump cut our funding and our budget, right? But like these are multi-million-dollar corporations. They're making massive profits. None of these, like, yeah, fuck Trump, fuck the Big Beautiful Bill Act, and like all of that bullshit. But at the end of the day, these are for-profit corporations where CEOs are raking in things like 26 million fucking freaking dollars. Sorry.
We've already said enough cuss words that it's fine. Let loose. I'll bleep it out.
Okay. and and then they want to act like it's the nurses that are asking for too much. When they just want regular compensation and decent staffing, right? Shannon, the nurse that I interviewed, one of the nurses I interviewed, she even said this as victim blaming, and I wrote it down in my notes in my notebook before she even said it, but then I put it in quotes. Uh, it's classically what they're doing. They're doing the HR liberal, like, oh, we care so much approach. It's just this other bad guy who is making us have to be mean to you, right? So screw them, screw the companies. We have to rally behind the nurses, uh, and demand that our healthcare system be totally reformed, but at least start with taking care of the staffing situation with the nurses, right? I asked a lot of the nurses about political scope, like if they thought about the broader implications when it comes to the healthcare system. And generally, they said, that it was, you know, the whole system was screwed up, and there were some like vague, rejections of like the for-profit healthcare system and stuff, that healthcare is a right and stuff like that. But broadly, they really care about how the dismantling of their benefits and their staffing and their pay and their like work-life balance prevents young people from wanting to go into nursing, which will just exacerbate the system in the long run and likely lead to a total collapse of the American for-profit healthcare system.
Yeah, and like we should also mention that the American for-profit healthcare system is really, I mean, I think you probably already, you already basically mentioned it, but it's very unstable, and it's one of those things that, I actually, funnily enough, so I got home from work this morning and I took a shower, and after I shower, I usually just kind of sit around and watch some shit on Instagram. And I saw this post that this comedian did where he was, doing some stand up, and he was talking about the healthcare CEO that just got shot a year ago. And I guess he didn't just get shot, he got shot a year ago. And there was someone who worked for United Healthcare that was there who knew him and was like, yeah, it's really sad that he died. Like, that really, we were all, really sad and blah, blah, blah. And he was like, oh, what did you work in for United Healthcare? And she goes, oh, I worked in marketing for the elderly. Now, if you know anything, and specifically she worked in marketing for Medicare and Medicaid. Now, if you know anything about those programs with United Healthcare, it has been notoriously, it's basically been found out that they have been, one of their policies, among many, is that if a patient is showing signs of a stroke or a heart attack or any of these things at an old folks home, the nurse has to call the United Healthcare and their line before they can call an ambulance.
Right.
So when I hear this and I'm like, oh, this lady literally sold faulty health insurance. I mean, all health insurance is faulty. She literally sold some of the most predatory health insurance to elderly people who might not have even known what they were signing up for.
Right.
And
Yeah, I
like,
saw that video too,
yeah,
and it was really interesting because I was like, "What does she actually do?" Like when marketing for Medicare, I'm like, "What does that mean?" Right?
and it's such a nebulous term. What marketing? What do you do exactly? And honestly, to me, I kind of a little, not even a conspiracy theory. It's just like a theory that I have. Is marketing is a fake profession. That is not a real thing.
Oh no, it's
Um,
a real thing. It's psychological warfare. It's like literally look up Edward Bernays if you want
Edward
to know more.
Bernays.
Yeah.
Well, listeners, look that person up as well. But I think this was, like closing up here on this topic. I really appreciate talking about this because it's really important to highlight organized labor, that things that are happening on the ground, action that's happening now to resist, and to hold these leeches accountable for what they are doing. And hopefully, eventually, we can do more to really get them out of power, but this is the first step. This is the first step into getting to that point.
In relation to our like private conversation, like marketing is spying, or it's an arm, it's a wing of intelligence.
Yeah, it absolutely is. And so don't trust people who market healthcare to you. But anyway, thank you, Comrade. I'm going to go ahead and Okay, so welcome back to the Liberation Hour. This is my segment on the Iranian struggle with Comrade Monty. We are going to be discussing what's going on in Iran. I did a little bit of a segment on this, like I talked about this last week when I was live, but things have progressed. There's also a lot of stuff like just happening in the region right now, but Iran especially is there's a lot of stuff happening and a lot of stuff we don't really know about. But I think it's important to kind of talk about it and see where we're going to go from there. Look at the past, look at the present, and the possible futures, which we really don't know a ton right now, but we're going to just start the conversation and see how it goes from there. Comrade Monty, you want to go ahead and introduce yourself again to the audience?
Hey, I'm Comrade Monty. I am cadre in the American Party of Labor, and I am here to talk to you about, what's going on in Iran today. Happy to be here. It's a big topic, a lot of moving parts, but let's go.
Yeah, yeah. So I guess we should go ahead and start off at the beginning because there's a lot to talk about with Iran and its history. We're not going to go too far back. But basically as like an establishing point, there's been a lot of stuff going around that like the Iranian people, you know, obviously there's pushback and resistance against like the Islamic Republic because it is obviously very oppressive. Like there's no doubt about that. And a lot of people are saying that like Iranian people, like going as far as to say Iranian people aren't don't practice Islam. There's like this whole thing about like, well, Iranian people like, they don't they don't practice Islam or like they're not Arabs. So a lot of people making assumptions that only Arab people practice Islam, which just isn't true. It's true that Iranian people are Persian, and then this area used to originally be called Persia. It's not anymore, but that doesn't stop people from identifying as Persian and also identifying with Islam. Islam has been in the region since around 600 AD. It's been there for a really long time. It's not new or by any means. Not that I think a ton of people thought that, but that is kind of something I've been hearing, and I'm like, that's very weird. But anyway, so kind of getting things started. So before the election of Mohammad Mossadegh, there was the Shah. A lot of people think that the Shah came only after Mossadegh, or there was a different one before. No. There's a lot of people, Americans, I just don't think understand the history of the area. And so before Mossadegh went and came into power, it was actually this guy's dad who was in power from like 1925 to 1941. I believe was the time frame that he was in power, and he was a military leader prior to that. And then afterwards, his son took the throne in 1941. Um, Comrade, did you want to add anything to the discussion around the time before the election, or any like information on that?
You mean like before Mossadegh was
Yeah,
elected?
yeah,
Yeah. So one thing I just want to say is that like the Shah before Mossadegh, uh, who ruled as a king since the overthrow of the Qajar dynasty by the British imperialists in 1921. So he was put in power in 1921, and then in 1941, Reza was deposed by the same British imperialists who'd installed him because his fascist sympathies had brought him into an alliance with Adolf Hitler. So like
yeah.
monarchy is like historically fascist. Like it's not okay, I guess, that like the British deposed, you know, like the monarchy for their own colonial aims, but it was really not that they had an issue with, the king as such, right? It was that the king had aligned himself with fascists that were the enemies, the ostensible enemies of British imperialism at the time.
Right. And I think that there's also the important aspect here is that a lot of the, if not all of the Iranian oil was owned by the Anglo-Iranian oil company, which was just a British oil company. And like that's going to play a really key factor, like a
Which is
really key
today
role.
British Petroleum.
Oh, British, is that what British Petroleum?
Yeah, BP, all those the green signs, gas stations. That's the same company.
Oh, really? BP apparently, yes, but Iranian oil was very important to the British. And I should reference this. I was listening to this last night at work. This is a really good video by some pretty solid leftists online who run a podcast called No Politic Here. It's podcast is run by Chris Coons and the Isaac Zale from Overzealots. They're both pretty cool and they have some solid content. And so they run this podcast and they did a whole Iran episode. They're like doing a couple like different episodes. It was really informative and helped give me some background so that I could make a more solid and like a much better analysis on what was going on of things that I just didn't know. And so as it pertains to Iranian oil, part of the reason it actually became so important to the British is because they have this, country to keep like this quote unquote first world country. Of course, that wasn't really the language that was being used at the time, but what was essentially a first world country that they were trying to keep running and keep wealthy. But also because the British Royal Navy had just switched over from coal to oil. And so they were in desperate need of Iranian oil.
So like we have to think about like the British Empire as like the Britain itself is this very small island with very limited natural resources, but was the first to develop industrial capitalism and these massive trade routes around the world. And I think a lot of that was due to their limited resources that they had right like to go out and plunder and colonize and steal the resources of the rest of the world in order to develop industrially in the way that they felt they needed to.
Right. And I think that like it's important to recognize this because this does play a huge role in what happens in events coming later. Which I guess we could go on over to them now is Mohammad Mossadegh is elected in 1951. This is after the Second World War. We're about, what, 5 or 6 years after it's basically ended. And Iran, actually, previous to this, something important to note is there was already a parliament that was uh, like there, basically. The parliament was installed, I want to say, like between 1909 and 1911 in Iran. And this was due to some more political unrest that was happening at the time in the country. And so Mossadegh is kind of like he's like this guy that's like brought up in this like era where like he's actually related somewhat to like Iranian royalty. But he got started working in the government when he was like 12 and was like a tax collector. And I learned this also on the No Politic Here podcast. But apparently like he like told his mom like he realized she hadn't paid her full taxes and like he was like it doesn't matter if you're like descendant of royalty, you need to pay your taxes. So he made her pay them.
This was Mossadegh. He made
Yeah.
his pay all her back taxes.
Yes. Yes, he did.
That's like something that Sankara would do.
Yeah. Yeah, no, it's really funny. And he kind of came in on this wave of like nationalism basically around like he was a very like eccentric leader. And he wasn't there for too long, but he had a lot of backing because he had like invested a lot of time into Iranian politics. Like that was his life. And he was elected democratically. This was like a fair election. He was very popular. Like he was an extremely popular person in the Iranian government. And when he came to parliament with his basically his plan to nationalize the Iranian oil company and basically seize Iranian oil, it passed unanimously in the parliament. This was a very popular policy, and obviously. As we know from other experiences now, well, now we're in 2026. It's been decades and decades since this happened. This will not be, this was, in fact, one of the first times that the CIA did something like this, and it will not be the last. Comrade Monty knows a lot about the CIA.
Yeah, it's have you seen those T-shirts that like have all the regime changes in the back? Like it's a list of like concert dates.
Yeah, oh my God. I didn't realize that was the thing.
Yeah, I'll send you something in the chat. I'm trying to bring up like some references for some of the early Marxist movements in Iran, but
Okay.
some of the Iranian sites, I guess, get blocked or don't work or don't translate.
Yeah, no, they, but that's really funny. I didn't realize that those t-shirts, yeah, like the Iranian, well, also there's a blackout right now in Iran. If you're trying to access like Iranian websites, like their internet is not happening or not working right now, I think, because of the protests.
Just realize that that's probably what the issue is.
Yeah. Mossadegh is very popular. He's only in power for like probably the same length of time that JFK was in power before he got like murked by the CIA. Like he's not there for very long because in 1953, guess what? Oh yeah, regime change, baby. This is if you don't know who he is, Alan Dulles. And this is he's not even worth remembering his name, but he was the leader of basically what the British CIA was, which was MI6. And so Alan Dulles and the leader, the Sir something or other, Sir Matthew, and his last name starts with an S. Yeah, he was the leader of MI6. And then this, of course, is the Shah. And they're like, yeah, no, you cannot nationalize this oil company. Britain low-key needs that for their economy. Um, this is not gonna work. And so they basically install a like do a coup, and it didn't actually work the first time, but it spooked Mossadegh enough that he like abdicated, or that's I mean he wasn't the king, but like he basically gave up power and like was like, I don't want to die. Here you guys like here, have the country basically because he was like, oh, this is it's pretty interesting because he had kind of allied with some like more basically what he was afraid of is that they were going to think he was a communist if he continued to do what he was going to do, and he wasn't a communist is the thing, and he didn't want to be like associated with that.
Right. Oh, one thing, if we can just maybe do a little background on Alan Dulles, just
Yeah.
because he is kind of like a really important figure, and if anyone here is like a left wing person and they don't know anything about him. So Alan Dulles was he was let me pull up so I got the right dates, but he was director of the OSS in World War II, and before that, him and his brother John Foster Dulles were him and his brother John Foster Dulles were big time lawyers for the law firm Sullivan and Cromwell. This is the law firm that represents the big interest of steel and oil across the world. This includes Krupp, which was the Nazi steel company, right? Uh, I believe like H.G. Farben, um, the German chemical company that used slave labor to develop itself during World War II. Um, and so this is a guy who was very sympathetic to the Nazi cause, to fascism broadly, um, and laid the foundations for what we might call the Fourth Reich in America, right? Like that, the sort of transformation of this like international capitalist dictatorship, Anglo-American capitalist dictatorship around the world. Very very important figure to know about. But him and his brother uh, were he was head of the CIA from he was deputy director from 1951 to 1953, and then deputy director of plans in 1951, and then he was the director of CIA from 1953, February 1953 to November 1961. So he was director of the CIA when the coup happened. It was like one of his
Okay.
first. The coup happened in August, and he was appointed director in February.
Oh, wow. Okay. Yeah. And like that's the thing about like the thing about Alan Dulles, because like okay, I went on a like I went on a rampage and listened to all 5 seasons of Blowback like in like the matter of like 3 weeks. And when I tell you how many times the name Alan Dulles came up in that show,
I've
like
never listened to it. But there's a podcast that it's you can't find it online, but I have it all in a Proton doc. It's called Programs to Chill, and like that's the best podcast I've ever listened to. Like I highly recommend listening to it if you want. I can send you the doc, the
yeah,
folder
sure.
and. But yeah, he talks a lot about Alan Dulles and goes into it. Did you know that Alan Dulles received a phone call from our friend Vladimir Lenin?
What?
On the eve of the October Revolution.
No way.
And Lenin wanted to meet with him before he went back to Russia to try to like negotiate a deal with the U.S. as far as like recognizing the Soviet Union and uh, like backing like the overthrow of the Czar.
No
And
way. That's crazy.
you know what Alan Dulles did?
What did he do?
He blew him off so he could have a threesome with twins.
What?
Yeah.
Alan Dulles, you godless communist. Alan Dulles.
Yeah. No, I mean he's a fascist for sure.
Well, no, he likes to say that like he likes to talk about godless communists, and I'm like, you can't be having a threesome with twins and be
Right.
like, you godless communists. Like, man, what the hell? This okay, here's the thing. I'm very sex positive, like do what you do, as long as they are of age and they are consenting, XYZ, do your thing, chicken wing. But like Alan Dulles, sorry, were you talking, comrade?
I think it's okay to draw the line at incest threesome.
Incest?
But they're sisters, right? They're twins.
Oh fuck, you're right. Wait a second. Oh my god, never mind. Okay, cutting that part. Jesus Christ. With twins?
Yeah, yeah. That's the story. Okay, so like, I don't know if this is like totally 100% like sourced and everything. History is a confusing thing, and lots of stories get told, right? Uh, but that is the story that I heard that he received a call from Vladimir Lenin and he declined the meeting because he had other plans.
Oh my god, that's insane. Imagine receiving a call from Lenin on the eve of the revolution. And he's like, listen, we're gonna do the revolution. And you're like, no, I'm gonna go do an incest threesome actually. What the fuck? Okay. Okay, moving on. That's not I didn't even realize that those two like timelines. I'm like just now realizing Alan Dulles was born in like 1893. This is an old motherfucker.
Yeah. Oh, here on his Wikipedia, it even says that the day before Lenin left Switzerland to travel to St. Petersburg aboard a German train after recovering from the Spanish flu, he was assigned to the American delegation at the Paris Peace Conference along with his elder brother Foster. Uh, so he was assigned to the thing the day before Lenin left, and I guess like received the call, but like was like, nah, I just got here. I'm trying to fuck Switzerland, maybe.
Oh my God.
Um, yeah.
Cool. Back to Iran. So yeah, Alan Dulles, freaky motherfucker, but also really good at espionage and doing spy stuff.
All right, if you want to learn about the JFK assassination, you should listen to Fourth Reich Archaeology. That's the podcast to like listen to it. For the audience, for your left podcast like choices, I would highly recommend uh para power mapping, programmed to chill. If you can find it, if you're interested, you can comment on here and maybe I'll send you the proton doc. And then um Fourth Reich archaeology. These are the like and subliminal jihad. Those are like great podcasts that are like actually the people who do them do a ton of their own research and they like take a bunch of different sources and they synthesize their own view right on it. Like I've listened to like Behind the Bastards one time and I have a similar complaint as I did with like a Trunon, and it's that like so I was like I had a girlfriend recently, not together anymore, but anyway, she would be like, "Oh, I listen to podcasts when I go to sleep," and she put on Behind the Bastards, and I like couldn't sleep because I was like, "These people are dumb."
So basically, moving on. So the CIA did regime change, albeit not very stealthily. They were not. This it was their first time, guys. It was their first time doing regime change. So like they were still a little not very good at it. Still trying to critique or not critique, but perfect the method. But basically, they still successfully carried out regime change. They spooked Mossadegh, and he was like, "All right, I'm out of here." So the Shah comes back into power. It is very brutal. He reprivatizes the oil, Iranian oil, and essentially, England gets what it wants, and Iran is the working people of Iran are once again under the thumb of imperialism and puppet, which is the Shah. And so this is from about 1953 until the Islamic Revolution of 1979. And the thing about this period is there's a ton of change. The city of Tehran, for example, is transformed. It was a pretty small city to begin with. But by 1979, Tehran was like this it was like a booming city. There was a lot going on. There was a lot of opulence as well. Once again, the No Politic Here podcast does have a really good informational segment on Iran. I highly recommend. That's where I'm pulling a lot of my info from. And so, like basically, like that whole time that the Shah is in power, there are some like reforms that are done, but it is still extremely brutal. The wealth inequality is insane. And the Shah is very stupid, but also very brutal. And he also had many different wives. A little tidbit information about him. And was, as you can see, very opulent. Had a whole get up going on over here. I mean, that's probably like the royal, suit or whatever it is. But needless to say, Shah was not great. So moving on. Now we have the Iranian Islamic Revolution in the current state. So basically, the Islamic Revolution happens, and a lot of it is like very grassroots. And the reason being is the Shah was paranoid about being overthrown by communists. So he really cracked down on the left. What the Shah was not really anticipating was an Islamic revolution. And it was mainly organized in the bazaars. That's where it started. And so you have this gigantic movement happening. You have Ayatollah
Khomeini.
Khomeini. He's super extremely popular. And it's, because the people want to change. This is not coming out of nowhere. The Islamic Revolution wasn't some kind of top-down thing that just happened and it was imposed. This was due to conditions. People were struggling, people were suffering. The wealth inequality was insane, and they were looking for a way out of that. And this was being presented as an actual solution. We also, once again, have to remember, as I mentioned at the beginning of the episode, Islam was still like a predominant religion in the area. While there was, the secular rule of Mossadegh as prime minister, and then there was the Shah. Islam was still is still like a really a driving force. And another thing that's important is part of the reason Tehran, like the revolution, was coming from Islam more specifically, is because you have all of these, as Tehran and their urban centers are growing, and there's people branching out, some people who are non-religious and some people who are, you have these young men who are coming from the countryside who are then coming into the urban areas and seeing all of this. And so there's like a lot of cultural shifts happening where people want to see a change. Their conditions are, they're ripe to be, swayed by, basically any promising movement that is saying, we're not going to do this. And it's credible. And so the Iranian Islamic Revolution happens in 1979. The Shah is deposed. He flees. And there's this brand new government. And
Yeah. So one thing I want to talk about is just like the way that we think about revolutions, the way we think about like mass movements and stuff like that. I think that's an important thing to sort of like stick on for a second, and it's that so when the Shah was in power, he was like a very loyal anti-communist, right? That was what the British Petroleum Company cared about, or the Anglo-Iranian oil company is what they cared about, right? Is like making sure that there were no communists able to take power in places where they held interests, right? And so the massive repression of political parties and of communists specifically created the discontent that like led to the revolution. But because it was so specifically the regime was so specifically anti-communist that it made it like very very difficult for the communist movement to grow and to breathe and to develop, right? That the most and that he wasn't so like hard on like religious institutions, right? Like you're a king, you want to use religion to like control people, right? To like it's on you would think that it's on your side, right? But because there was like this large like anti Shah religious movement that was like able to meet in mosques and do all of these things, that was the massive opposition party, and the Communist Party was a very small minority by the time the 1979 revolution rolls around. This is why it's really, really, really important that we remember as communists what Engels says uh, about uh, basic and broad democratic reforms, right? Because some people might say, oh, any kind of democratic reforms, that's a waste of our time. We have to just go straight to the revolution, right? Just push for the revolution. But the reality is that our movement, especially our movement as a communist movement, is one that is based in a scientific knowledge of the way that our social reality changes. Requires a lot of education. Like it requires a core of cadre who are very educated on these topics. And if we can't develop that, then whatever is the most popular group at the time of crisis is going to be the one that has the most power, right? And so this is what happened in 1979, right? The communist movement was very weak due to repression, and so the Islamic movement was the one that was able to seize power, uh, rig the elections, and like take over and install the clerical regime, right? And then we see, like, if we're gonna jump ahead just a little bit, that like what's happening now is the communist movement has been horribly suppressed even through that time, right? All like since the 80s in Iran, and you have these sort of the progressive movement that's revolting against the Ayatollah's regime today is one of liberal, like liberal feminists, liberal, like sort of ethnic minority groups, that and the small capitalists or national capitalists that want to be able to trade internationally, right? So these are the groups that have been able to like establish a lot of social capital in the meantime, while the communist organizations have been in exile and losing touch with the people, or very small groups. Not to say that there aren't like hopeful things happening with the Iranian movement today, because there are workers' councils and stuff. But I think it's important to understand that framing, that, as Engels says, the revolutionary movement needs light and air, the ability to work in public and speak about our issues and what we're fighting for, without like immediately being shot or thrown in prisons.
Yeah, those are ideal conditions to not be shot and thrown in prison. But yeah, I would say that's really important because it was very much an opportune time. They were like the Shah and his puppet regime were so preoccupied with trying to keep a leftist movement from happening, because we have to remember all the way from 1953 to 1979 and beyond, the United States is fighting, like tooth and nail to kill any kind of revolutionary movement whatsoever. There was the Vietnam War, there was the Korea War, there was the coup in Guatemala, there was the coup of Salvador Allende, there was like so much happening around the world. Also, the Cold War. And the Soviets were planning on going into around 1979. They were goaded into going into Afghanistan, in a form of social imperialism. So there was a lot happening in the world at that time and it was why, the Iranian regime of the Shah was so preoccupied, because they did not want another Mossadegh. They did not want, and Mossadegh also wasn't a communist, and he did not want to necessarily be associated with the communist movement, even though in some cases he collaborated with the communist movement. But ultimately, they did not want another situation where they would actually have to, um, treat Iran as an economic equal. And by that I mean Western imperialists. And they still don't want to treat Iran as an economic equal, which is why today we have so much of the Mossad and the CIA are so invested. Presumably, obviously, we don't know anything about this because they are very secretive organizations, but understanding how these organizations work, they are, they're very keen on seeing the Iranian revolution fall and installing another puppet. This is very much because, and for different reasons, of course. Israel, wants to be, one of the top dogs in the region, doesn't like Iran, and does a lot of propaganda against them. And the United States also wants access to Iranian oil, and also doesn't like that they are, very defiant to the American empire. And so I think this takes us into the Iranian protests that are happening now, which is why we're doing this topic. The current international relationships that Iran holds and the imperialist influences that are on them. Because here's the thing, I don't like this goes without saying, honestly, but like obviously I'm not in support of the theocracy. Like I don't think no leftist is like in support of the theocracy. Like it's we're not out here like, oh yeah, we have to keep them in. But part of the reason why this is so perplexing is it's not that we want the theocracy to stay in power. That's not at all what the case is. It's that the political actors that are presently in the region and that are and what's happening, this might not end well for the Iranian people. And that's where I mainly land. I land in the camp of supporting the working people of Iran, supporting any kind of leftist momentum that is going on over there, and supporting their survival. I don't want to see the Iranian people, having violence done against them by the state. Obviously, this is very worrying. Even if the Iranian Islamic Republic is deposed or is somehow removed, what might come next might not necessarily be better. And so what's going on right now is, obviously with the internet blackout, we can't really know a ton, but I did see on a channel that I'm on, there was bodies of dead protesters that were stacked up in a hospital. There has been a violent crackdown. We don't know the specifics right now, but it is getting very serious, and it has been very serious. Do you want to add anything to that, Comrade?
Yeah, so this is going back to like my spiel about light and air, right? Is that one my view, like I have a very limited scope as far as my view on like what it's like on the ground in Iran. Like I obviously have never been there. I don't know like I know like a decent amount of people who are like you know second generation like Iranians and stuff like that. Second and third that have come to like New York City and stuff. But and like the perspective that you get from sort of the diaspora can vary, right? We have a big problem on the left with the way that we handle diaspora politics that maybe we should get into. I think that's actually maybe the most important thing that we can do as Americans is critique our relationship to diaspora politics. But
I agree.
um, what I think is likely the case is that the Iranian Ayatollah regime is likely not going to fall or be deposed entirely unless it is like straight up couped by Mossad or something, which would be a very bad thing for the sort of international struggle against Zionism. What I think is the best possible, like likely situation to happen is that these massive demonstrations force the current regime to open up democratic reforms to the people, open up more sort of political forums and debate within the society, which will give more light and air or room to breathe for a stronger left wing movement, hopefully a communist movement to develop, right? What happens when you have a big if we look at like Nepal or something, right? What happens when you have like a large amount of unrest in a society, and a lot of that is for good reason, right? There's very much good reason to be against the theocracy, right? If you're a woman, if you're a minority, if you're a worker, there's a lot of repression. But if you don't have a strong, centralized working class organization, right, a party for the working class, that energy is going to be picked up by basically whoever has the most social capital and whoever has the most money, right? That's why Mossad and the US intelligence forces are going to flood in money and guns and stuff because they can find the ones that are going to be most amenable to U.S. and Israeli interests, and then just pump them with as much media representation and as much money and weapons as they possibly can. It's a double-edged sort of struggle for the working class of Iran, right? Because they have to resist both foreign intervention and their own government to build something new.
Right. And I think that I also think it's important to recognize that part of the reason that these protests are even happening is because of the economic situation that's currently happening in Iran. And that is in large part due to the economic sanctions. The currency right now is like going insane. Currently, from what I've heard, is that it has started because of a huge amount of inflation. Obviously, there had already been a lot of political repression happening anyway, political, economic repression that was going on. There has always been a lot of government corruption in Iran, just due to a lot of different factors, obviously, that we've stated prior. But as Comrade Monty was saying, this is a very opportune moment for intelligence agencies of the West because they understand that it's only a matter of time before destabilization begins to happen, and especially in countries like this, because they are, with these huge economic sanctions that are imposed by those same intelligence agencies, countries, they are able to just basically wait them out. and see how long it takes. And then, obviously flood as they do time and time again, flood the country with guns and money, as Bonte was saying, and take advantage of more militant, often right-wing groups that want to, overthrow the current regime and then, become the next. And so, this also leads me into the current imperialist relationships that Iran has with Russia and China. We know that kind of the alternative economic imperialist situation that's been developing has, with the BRICS alliance somewhat, but also with other, just in the fact that Russia and China even exist in the way that they do. Iran is very much aligned, more aligned than anything, than especially than with the US, with these two countries. China obviously buys Iranian oil, very important for them. It's also important to recognize that part of the reason that the U.S. is even participating in this right now is in large part for why they participated, why they did the overthrowing of Venezuelan leader Nicolas Maduro, was to try to provoke China, because China also buys Venezuelan oil. Like they were also a big customer. And so this is very much the United States trying to encroach on their economic territory, because as we know, China has been trade maxing, and very much trying to, step on their toes, provoke them, whatever the case may be. And this has definitely been a game of chess between these big imperial powers, which Iran is nowhere as near as powerful.
Yeah, and we have to understand that like these contradictions within Iranian society are exacerbated by the economic sanctions, and it's important to understand, uh, because we have like a lot of the left movement, popular left movement, especially ones that associate themselves with communism, tend to jump into this sort of campist mode of thinking where yeah, these American sanctions are the like root of all of the problems. But the reality is, if we look at uh, countries that have actually really successfully developed a something akin to a strong socialist infrastructure, even if it's not totally like a socialist country, those are the ones that have been the most resilient in resisting the impacts of this economic warfare the U.S. has been waging for the better part of the last decade, or of the better part of the last century. The best way to fight against it, to advocate for and to work towards building socialism internationally, right? That if you develop your economy internally and have other like other nations that can trade with you, you can in like a block like the Soviet Union had, you can kind of circumvent a lot of these issues. But because the actual contradictions of Iranian society have been so repressive, these massive uprisings have been happening like every 5 to 10 years, and like seemingly growing increasingly frequent in the last decade.
Yeah, and I think that's an important point to put out there. I kind of tried to allude to it, but you said it outright, which is just better. The discussion around the fact that, like Cuba, for example, definitely a much stronger socialist state. Even though they're a tiny island and everything, they've been doing a lot. Not necessarily, I don't know much in the vein of like advocating for socialist development as much as, they obviously have been doing a lot of development. Cuba has also been making moves to basically, I actually researched this myself when I was in a couple classes last semester talking about their climate change plan. Cuba is so much better equipped, and it's because of their allocation of their resources. They've been doing a ton to basically beef up their economy, their production. and taking steps and measures to ensure that the people are taken care of. And it doesn't mean that there's not uprisings or that there's not disagreements or protests or demonstrations. It just means that their conditions and the way that they're allocating their resources are definitely a lot more efficient. And there is revisionist tendencies in Cuba. I won't act like that's not true, but they definitely are in a much better spot. And Iran is an economic mess, absolutely because of the sanctions, most certainly, but also because of other factors like government corruption. And there still is a wealth gap, and there still are problems because you know this the theocracy, the Islamic Republic, is not a socialist institution. They are not they are not doing that same kind of development and that same kind of like work that the Cuban government has been doing for the better part of 50 years, over 50 years. And so I think it's really important to point that out because, these are very much the consequences, not just of what the United States has been doing, which is obviously aggressive economic warfare, which is a huge problem, but also because of the fact that this is not a sustainable system. The system itself is flawed because they are not taking care of the working people. They are also extremely violent to their people. Once again, I do not support this theocracy. I do not support forced regime change by outside actors who are doing it for their own reasons. I support I support the working class overall, the international proletariat. And as it pertains to the Iranian people, what I want for the Iranian people ultimately is a situation in which their governing body is not exploiting them in their labor, and that they have direct access and ability to actually participate in a democratic system. That's not going to happen while the Islamic Republic exists, and that's also not going to happen while Western imperialism is constantly imposing itself on them. Did you want to add anything to that?
Um, yeah, not really. I think you did a good job. I definitely want to reiterate that like our role as communists in the you know imperial core, as some might call it, is to resist all efforts to start a war with Iran, especially those of the rogue apartheid state known as Israel. We have to resist any like attempts to restore the Shah through his son Reza, and we also have to like resist any like and denounce and report on any covert or black ops carried out against Iran by foreign powers such as U.S. and the Zionist entity. I think we really have to double down on that aspect, right? That there are going to be black operations, all kinds of covert operations to destabilize or promote a specific faction, probably the one that would want to restore the Shah by foreign powers. And we even see this in like our media today that like, uh, a lot of the framing when it comes to American news on this is that, oh, the people want the Shah back, right? And that it's I from the diaspora that I've met, I do not think that that's particularly super popular, and I it leads me to believe that it's much less popular in Iran itself because so much of the democratic movement are maybe liberal feminists, right? Just or like it's a feminist movement broadly, right? And um, I don't think that I would hope, right? But I don't think that anywhere it's very popular in the feminist movement to reinstate a king.
Yeah, no, and I would say that, it's important to realize that because, a Western press, here's the thing. Western press is absolutely going to try to spin, and they already have. They're already trying to spin this as the Iranian people are like They're ready for regime change and they want the Shah back, and it's already happening. You can already see the way Western press is trying to mold this and shape it to the exact desires of what Western capital wants and foreign capital, because obviously they want Iran. They want Iran's land, they want Iran's resources, they want Iran's labor. And they're going to do everything that they can to get their grubby little hands on those resources, and the Western press is very much aiding and abetting that. They are absolutely, we're already seeing it the way that they have been framing the issue, because there's already been infighting all over the internet about this. And people are not stopping enough to look at this and say, okay, what are the actual events that are happening? What do I actually know for sure? What can I know concretely? People are making a ton of assumptions right now on what the Iranian people do or don't want. We don't really know right now what's happening, because once again, we don't actually know who the main political actors are of this protest. We might start to get an idea soon in the next few days, but it's important to realize that Western influence is still very prevalent. Mossad is still very much doing everything in their power to try to take down Iran. I think that this is a good time to also talk about the events that happened last November when Israel or was it November or over the summer? I think it may have been over the summer. I'm totally getting the only point of reference I have is that I was watching a Zoran Mamdani debate at that time, and I can't remember if it was in October or if it was over the summer, but I believe it was over the summer that the Israelis went and bombed Iran. And there was like this back and forth that was going on, and oh, sorry, go ahead, Monty.
Trump bombed Iran too. So
Yes.
just the Israelis is the American imperialists.
Yes, and they kind of ganged up on them a little bit, and then Iran went and like bombed Qatar or something, or whatever, and like that happened. But like there was that little spat that happened, and so I wouldn't be surprised if there were intelligence assets that were also involved in these protests that are trying to sow civil unrest. And that's not to say that there isn't real civil unrest. There absolutely is. A lot of these protests started in the bazaars. They started where people were talking about their conditions and they were unhappy about them, as they should be, because the conditions are bad. But that doesn't mean that we should all jump to say, these protests are an amazing thing. I mean, I think it's good that people are demonstrating for their rights. I think that's amazing. Absolutely support that. But we honestly don't know. There's as the kids say, as I've been saying, because once again, I'm a very big fan of this podcast, we don't know what the blowback of this is going to be. And I think it's important to realize just how opportunist the situation possibly is. That, the people we should be ultimately supporting are the working people of Iran and an actual leftist movement that can not only depose the Islamic Republic, but also Western capital, and actually stand a fighting chance at liberating the people from, these imperialist chains that have been put upon them unwillingly, obviously. So,
You can think whatever you want. You can believe anything that you want, like whatever, right? Like what you believe is much less important than like giving some actionable advice for the movement. And what I see is that we have like a lot of different diaspora groups in the U.S. Like it's a nation of immigrants. Um, and a lot of the most powerful groups on the left are diaspora groups. The Palestinian diaspora has like massive organizations that have been growing over the last decade here in the U.S. And there's a massive Korean diaspora that advocates for anti like that is anti-imperialist, right? We have a lot of every diaspora group here in the US has a ton of revolutionary potential that needs to be tapped. And it seems that the Iranian one is less left wing, right? That there are like I don't know of an Iranian diaspora, left wing Iranian diaspora group such as Anakbayan with the Philippines, Notuto with Korea, and Within Our Lifetime, or some of the others for the Palestinian cause, as some examples. And I think the issue is that a lot of the American left is a bit campist, and it's easy to say, oh, or the Chinese diaspora too. So it's easy for if you're left wing and then your country has ostensibly socialist policies or is like just has no nation of their own, right? Like the uh, Palestinians and the Kurds, right? Or like that their nation has been taken from them. That it's easier to bring them over to the left when we're saying, oh, like upholding their country for their achievements as far as like democracy, like workers' democracy and things like that, right? But then when we have one where it's a bit more gray, everything's a little bit murkier, right? Because the Ayatollah is not, something that we can uphold as, a necessarily progressive, or you know, or anything like that, right? That the diaspora of a country like this will go towards those who reinforce the things that they like already believe about where they're from, right? So if they fled repression and the U.S. government says, "See, look how evil they are," or the right wing says, or the liberals all say, "Look how evil they are. What you guys need is free market and democracy, right? Like you need liberal democracy." Then that's what they'll believe because the communists aren't really saying a lot about what's happening in Iran. So we really need to be able to like not demonize Iran or dehumanize like Iranians in Iran when we uh, are trying to humanize and relate to the diaspora here in the U.S. Right? You have to like uh, it could be like a balancing act because you can't dismiss the diaspora and say, well, look, like the Iranian regime is the only thing standing between complete Israeli domination in the Middle East, right? And like dismiss their concerns for their family that's still there and things like that, right? And their point of view. We have to find a way to incorporate the Iranian diaspora or any other countries like this that come here because they don't want to live under like a theocracy or something like that, and show them that it's the root of this problem is still capitalism, right? It's that the theocracy or monarchies around the world, the semi-feudal state relations that still exist in order to benefit international capital, and we have to be able to form that into a coherent message that draws all diaspora groups into our sphere of influence, of understanding the method of our struggle.
Yeah, and I think that's a really good point to make, especially because diaspora, I think a lot of people, and I've held this position before, and I've obviously learned and grown from it, but there's definitely a lot of hostility, I would say, towards diaspora people, in some ways, because, yeah, there are some parts of that, like, for example, like the Cuban diaspora. Like Cubans in Miami are very different from Cubans in Cuba. And it's because, that relates back to economic and political differences that existed, especially, the conditions in Cuba. A lot of like the anti-Castro Cubans, for example, were mainly white Cubans who, were descendant of colonizers, the Spanish who colonized Cuba, and also who came from families who owned a ton of land and had slaves. That's not every Cuban that is in the diaspora, but that is a lot, like, that still exists, but that once again does not mean that we shouldn't still do everything we can as a working class movement to reach out and try to push the messaging that part of the reason why these countries are in so much knee deep in problems is because of capital, and the root cause time and time again has been capital and capitalism, and like what it does to countries and what it does to economies and to people and to working people more specifically. I think that the point you made is very important because people kind of go very black and white on that topic, and it's very much like you can't, people are not a monolith. You cannot ascribe one way of thinking to every single person that exists in that identity. It doesn't mean that we should not stop trying, that we should stop. It doesn't mean we should stop trying to, reach out and actually do the work to call these comrades in and say, hey, let's talk about this for real, and like, let's actually try to parse out what the real problem is rather than reactionary opinions, which again, not all diasporas hold. And, is once again, it's a very diverse set of opinions. As you talked about, like the Filipino diaspora has a lot of leftist organizations and ins in that way. And so, yeah, I think that's a really good point.
Thank you, comrade. Yeah. Is there anything else that we want to talk about?
I think that's pretty much it for right now. This situation is going to keep developing, and depending on how much more it develops, we might end up having to do a follow-up episode. I don't know. We'll see how things go. But I would say to end this, my biggest thing is for folks to stay critical and continue to scrutinize your sourcing and understand that we are in a very biased position here in Heart of Empire. So continue to grain of salt, biggest thing, and also continue to do good faith, well done research and understand the actual situation.
Yeah, I'm gonna just say double down on the stay critical, stay vigilant. I want to reiterate for the end, uh, the task ahead is for us as communists to study and understand the world as it is and as it is in motion, and to build an organization that can create the infrastructure for a strong working class party, and that our role then is to expose to the workers the scaffolding that holds up their oppressors so that they can tear it down with their bare hands.
Absolutely. All power to the working people.
Okay.
So yeah, that is the end of the episode. I'm going to go ahead and stop the share, stop the steal, and stop recording.